So I'd like to go ahead and welcome our next presenter, Scott Blackledge, and he's going to give us a legislative update on behalf of CalPERS. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you, Rita. Okay. So unlike prior years, I can honestly say that it's been very quiet in the legislature this past year. And so I don't have a lot to speak on. I think a lot of the legislators' time with regards to public employee benefits was just spent cleaning up last year's pension reform measure, PEPRA, the Public Employee Pension Reform Act of 2013. So for CalPERS purposes, there were only a couple of bills that dealt with cleaning up PEPRA, and that was Senate Bill 13. And that bill applied to all retirement systems, and it specifically cleaned up certain sections of the Reform Act. And I can just briefly touch on some of them that do affect schools. For example, it replaces the term new employees with new members in provisions relating to requirements that new members employed by certain public employers that they have an initial contribution rate of at least 50% of the normal cost rate. Other provisions include finally recognizing that for purposes of determining whether someone is a new member and subject to the PEPRA formulas, that if someone has reciprocity between retirement systems, let's say like between PERS and STRS, that they would not be considered a new member for purposes of having a reduced pension benefit. So if somebody was a STRS member and they become a PERS member, they can still retain the 2% of 55 benefit formula that applies to what we call classic employees. The bill also makes plain that employers that had a defined contribution plan prior to January 1st of 2013 can still offer another defined contribution plan as allowed in the Act. This may apply to some of your, let's say, joint powers authorities, groups that are contracting agencies under PERS instead of just under the school's pool. It also clarifies that annual inflation adjustment processes for the pension benefits cap, which is tied to the Social Security contribution limit. I believe it's $113,000. They just want to ensure that every retirement system is implementing the same cap. So the cap will be the same for PERS, it'll be the same for STRS, and it'll primarily be dependent on whether someone is subject to Social Security. It also clarifies that employer contribution limitations for defined contribution plans, including contributions on salaries above the pension benefits cap. So in other words, you can continue to pay, let's say, into a 403B or a 401K for someone on salary that you pay above the $113,000 limit. It also requires retirement systems to stop collecting employer and member contributions on salary above the pension benefits cap. Now, almost all of these things that I've just talked to, we've already implemented, and so these changes in current law are just conforming to our practice as we understood the intent of PEPRA to be last year. So there's not too much change there. And it also clarifies the provisions related to the definition of pensionable compensation. Not too much change there. I think Renee Ostrander, she's our retirement or pension reform specialist. If you have additional questions related to that, I think she can assist you. Another thing that may be important to you is that Senate Bill 13 also clarified that the retiree health benefit vesting requirement does not apply retroactively. And so this was the requirement that rank and file would receive the same health benefit package as your management or excluded employees, or let's say your board, if they were getting health benefits. Everybody has to get the same benefit going forward. It also clarifies that employees are not considered new members when becoming subject to a different defined benefit plan in a new retirement system as a result of changing employment positions. So it's just additionally clarifying the reciprocity issue. And that it also clarifies that the 3-year final compensation period for new members means 3 consecutive school years for members working in schools. Okay, so if there was any question there. CalPERS had our own conformity bill to change the public employees retirement law to conform with the pension reforms. And so we've clarified that new members are excluded from the existing compensation earnable sections in the public employees retirement law, and that there's additional regulations coming online that will clarify things for these new members that are hired after January 1st, 2013. We've also clarified in Senate Bill 220 how we determine the retirement benefit for a member retiring prior to age 52 when someone has service credit in an old formula and also in a PEPRA formula, a reduced formula. And so we've applied actuarial tables to reduce the benefit amount when somebody is eligible to retire under an old benefit where they're able to retire at age 50, whereas under the formulas in PEPRA, they can only retire at age 55 or later. So if they retire between that period, we'll reduce the PEPRA benefit a little bit more. So that's what we have there. As far as other legislation, not much was out there except for the board-sponsored legislation, AB 373, related to our long-term care program, and we are now expanding eligibility for adult children of public employees now that they're able to join the CalPERS long-term care program. Right now, the parents of public employees are able to participate, so that's there. I don't think that there's anything else. Is there any questions related to legislation or to the initiative proposal that's out there? Yes?
I just wanted to know, are we going to receive any circular letter from PERS regarding all these revised changes?
To the extent that they affect the school employers, we'll have to review that. At this point, I don't think so, because what I said previously is that we had implemented things after AB 340 was passed last year, and we sent out all the employer circulars, and there's really nothing, as I know, that relates to schools that would change the practices and the information that we've already provided in prior circulars.
Because you just mentioned about the employer contributions, an employee on the above the cap, and I thought the old procedures were that the employer will still pay employer contributions over the cap
Mary,
limit.
can you help us with this?
I don't see a handy microphone, so I'll just run up here. So we had, that is something that you can send to Brad Hansen. So that's what he was referring to when he was talking about if there's a specific letter that you need that confirms that. It was intended to be in the circular letter that was provided, I want to say it was in early summertime, where it talked about those limits. For whatever reason, it was inadvertently omitted to say that the employer will no longer pay over the cap. At the end of the day, the employer is still paying the same amount, because when the actuarial valuation is done, the actuaries determine there's this pot of money that I need in order to fund this benefit. And so whether it's funded through, your percent, or it's funded via, whether it's part of the percent or it's part of the unfunded liability, at the end of the day, it rolls up to be a specific pot of money that we need to administer that. So, with the changes that are a part of SB 220, which was where the direction we were headed anyway, we have changed the systems to where it no longer collects. And you should have already seen it. If you have anyone that has reached the cap, does anybody have anybody that has reached the cap? I mean, by now they should, most would have somebody. And if they have PEPRA members that make above that, which is 113 or 130 or 31, if you're not coordinated with Social Security. So anything above that, it's not just member contributions that are no longer payable. Also, the employer contributions are no longer payable. And like I said, if you need that in writing, all you need to do is send something to Brad Hansen, and he will send you a letter confirming that, so you can have it. It will be included in our circular letter that's coming out at the beginning of this next year for 2014.
And which will also give the caps again.
And it'll give the new caps. So there will be new caps for both our PEPRA, and I'm still waiting to hear. I haven't seen the final number for the classics, because classics that were hired after 96, July of 96, January of 96, they have a cap as well. And so I haven't seen whether or not that is changing, but we have seen the new numbers for PEPRA members, and those are changing.
Okay. Any other questions related to legislation, either what was done last year or what may be coming? Okay. I think I have one extra update. There was a bill to increase active school member death benefits. That was held in the Appropriations Committee, and it's effectively dead. I believe the sponsors have run that bill several times over the years. I'd expect them to run that again, but I believe that was the only other item. So with that, I'll thank you, and I'll hand it off to Rita again. Okay.
Thank you, Scott. So our next presenter will be Renee Ostrander, who will give us a brief update on pensionable compensation. Welcome, Renee.
Good morning, everyone. So I just answered the last question, but just officially, my name is Renee Ostrander, and I am the Assistant Chief in Customer Account Services. So I oversee a broad range of employer and member issues prior to retirement is the general area I cover. I've been at CalPERS for too many years to count. And so anyway, so what I'm going to talk about today is PEPRA. I've been the implementation lead for PEPRA for about the last 6 to 8 months. And so we've been, at the very beginning, we were on a very fast track trying to do a lot of work. It has slowed a little bit, thank goodness. So now we can take on this new initiative that's coming forward. But so the latest update for PEPRA is that there were 2 regulation packages that had come forward to our board. We've gone through the full regulatory process, and both of those packages have been approved by the Office of Administrative Law and filed. So, and they were filed immediately due to the fact that PEPRA was already implemented on January 1st of 2013. So if you were to go out to the California Code of Regulations, you would find these items. And it deals with new and classic members, which are probably terms that are becoming very familiar to you now if you deal with CalPERS on a regular basis with member enrollment and payroll. Final comp, on how to calculate the final comp for our new PEPRA members. Also reciprocity, so Scott spoke a little bit about that in his presentation, but reciprocity and the form that's required to be completed and put into a member's file if they have reciprocity, that would make them a classic member versus a new PEPRA member. Break-in service, and then of course the retirement plan, talking about the retirement plan that was in place for 12/31/12, which is defining what classic members receive if you hire a classic, someone who's determined to be classic after January 1 of 2013. So like I said, all of those have been filed with the Office of Administrative Law and are available to refer to should you have any questions. So this presentation is about pensionable comp. There's not a whole lot to talk about in this area. We were on pause for our legislative session to end. That was the big thing we were waiting for. We wanted to see, because there was talk of different changes that might be coming forward for pensionable compensation for our new members. We did not see any significant changes, especially in the schools area. There were a couple of minor changes, but nothing that impacts our school employers. So we are back at work on starting to work through drafting those regulatory pieces. We expect that those are going to come forward to our board as early as December, but more likely would be February. So you would see something come forward, and then that will initiate the full regulatory process, which includes posting it with Office of Administrative Law, and then a 45-day comment period for any members of the public that should wish to, could comment, send those comments to us for a response. Let's see, what else do we have? In the meantime, I guess the only other comment that I would make on that is, in the meantime, continue to follow the December 2012 circular letter that was provided. So that went out to all of our PAs and schools, and that notified each of the schools on what items were pensionable compensation and what needed to be reported. And we heard both Tim and Brad talk earlier about the fact that for those members, it's required, since we have items that have been removed from the list, it's required for PEPRA members to have those categories and types identified. So that's all I have. Questions regarding PEPRA, pensionable comp? Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Our next presenter is Deborah Prodomsky, to give us an update on service credit. Welcome, Deborah.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Deborah Petrowski, and for those of you, I've been at CalPERS for 35 years, so many of you I've met before. I worked in the regional offices for about 15 years down in Southern California. Recently got married. Last name was Gibson, so for those of you I've met before. I'm going to be giving you kind of an update on the service credit costing area, kind of where we've been, what the reason we kind of got to where we were, where we're today, and kind of some of the challenges that we're facing. So for many of you, you know that we've got public agencies, state agencies, and schools. And if you break down the government code sections that apply to service credit costing, there's about 43 different types of service credit that a member can purchase. Historically, our average inventory of requests that we have on hand has been about 6,800 requests. But that number started to grow over the last few years. Furloughs hit, we started redirecting staff to work on CalPERS, getting the requirements down for this area. Once we got closer to implementation, we directed even more staff to working on implementation. And then we were starting to get ready for implementation, and we had to stop working those requests about 3 months ahead of time. Anything that we calculated in the old system, we had to be able to elect in the old system. It wasn't transferring. So we called that our cutover period. So when we got to implementation, July of 2011, our normal inventory had increased to about 9,800 requests. At implementation, we had very limited functionality. So what we did is we got a group of individuals, our more seasoned staff, into a computer lab, and we started focusing on one of the 43 types of service credit. We decided to go with ARSC, a additional retirement service credit. That tended to be our largest inventory coming in. It was also one of our more simpler calculations and eligibility determination. And by December 2011, we were able to start implementing it and working through that volume that we had received. By April, we started focusing on our next service credit type, which was service prior to membership. And there's actually two components to service prior to membership. There's a possible an arrears determination where if once we get payroll in, we've determined that the member should have been brought into membership ahead of time. And then there's the service prior to membership piece. We knew that the arrears piece was not going to be functioning. So we, again, gathered a group of people. We started looking through the requests, determining what was arrears, kind of setting those aside. And by April, we were able to start working some of our service prior to membership requests. We then started working on redeposits. So you'll see a theme here. Every time we get through and get one service credit type working, then we focus on another step. We started working on redeposits, and that was kind of functioning by September 2011. At about that time, we started hearing about pension reform, as everybody else did. But what our members heard was that all service credit types are being eliminated. So we started getting in a large volume of requests. Our normal incoming request is about 2,000 a month. By November, that had doubled to 4,000, and by December, we had over 16,000 requests that came in one given month. Now, we had paper. I mean, this is supposed to be a paperless system. We had paper coming in through fax machines. We burned up 2 of our fax machines. It was running nonstop, 24/7. I would come in at 5 o'clock in the morning. I would gather volumes off of our fax machines. Once it got to a point where it ran out of paper, it would start storing stuff. I'd put paper in, it'd start kicking stuff out. It was like a nonstop process. And then by March, when we kind of got control of what was coming in, we could start looking at these requests. We had over 30,000 requests in inventory. March also, we got functionality to do arrears of 2013. So you'll start seeing that we're starting to work those requests now. We've taken several different steps to kind of address the backlogs. We've broken down into teams. We've got additional resources. We've hired seasonal clerks. We've redirected staff. When there's functionality that comes on, we do immediate training, and we've been able to reduce quite a bit of our inventory. When I ran the reports yesterday, our requests that we had on hand in March was over 30,000. As of Tuesday, it was 4,136. So we've gotten that number down tremendously, and it's much lower than what our normal inventory has normally been. Now, of those 4,000, we still have about 3,000 that are older than 90 days. And of that, about 1,600 of them are service prior to membership requests. Now, a lot of those are up in our employer membership area to determine whether or not there is truly an arrears period. They've developed a backlog reduction plan, and we hope by the end of the year that we'll have gotten through a lot of these requests. So what are some of the challenges that we're facing today? One of the biggest challenges that we're facing is that members are waiting until the time they submit their application to put in their request for service credit. And they're expecting that request to be done prior to the time that they retire. Where there becomes a problem is, number one, we won't have that done prior to retirement. But if they don't submit a completed request, we kick that request back to them and tell them that they need to resubmit it correctly. What typically is not there is either the online estimate that we're now requiring that they attach to the service credit cost form, letting us know that they've gone out to the service credit cost estimator and they have an idea of what this is going to cost. There's some cost involved. The other thing that's often missing is the certification, either from the employer, so we need payroll information, service prior to membership, we typically do not have that payroll, or we need the certification from the reciprocal system saying that they're eligible to purchase this. All of our publications, all of our counseling typically advise the member that they should be putting this request in a year prior to retirement. But what we're seeing historically is that they're waiting until the time they retire, which a lot of us do anyway as procrastinators. But that can create a problem because if the request isn't completed correctly, we're going to send it back to them. If they submit that new request after the retirement date, they're no longer eligible. So that becomes real critical to the member. Another issue that we're facing is on our SPM requests, is our service prior to membership requests. And the member is going back to the employer and they're having them complete the second page of that document that gives us payroll information. It typically has a time base, how many hours they worked, what their, let's see, it has a number of different items on there that we need in order to determine whether or not they were brought into membership correctly and to determine the cost. But there is a note at the bottom of that says that by the employer signing this, they realize that they're creating a possible liability to the employer. Where this becomes a problem is that when we do get these requests and we have to send them up to our membership review unit to determine whether they were brought into membership on time and correctly, sometimes there's arrears associated and the employer is getting a bill. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to determine whether it's 20283, mandatory arrears or not. And we're going to send a letter out to the member and we're going to send a letter out to the employer. And we're going to give the employer 30 days in which to challenge that. Oftentimes that letter is going to the Human Resources Department, but it doesn't get to the Payroll Department. So once the Payroll Department gets the bill, then they're screaming saying, gosh, we don't think that this is correct. By that point, it's almost too late. It's hard for us to unravel that. So we are working with membership, with Tim's group to look to see what we can do to better serve that process. It may be that we're going to send a letter to both payroll and HR and the member to try to help that process through. The other challenge that we're running into is our redeposits. And to give you an example where this most often happens, because I've got about 8 of them on my desk at the moment, a certificated member goes into CalSTRS and they submit their application for retirement. The counselor says, hey, you've got some service credit that you might be able to buy at CalPERS. Go see them. They submit their request for service prior to membership, but they don't have CalSTRS certify the document that says they are currently working for a CalSTRS agency. It takes CalSTRS sometimes to get that certification back to the member and the member to submit it to CalPERS. By that point, they've already retired. They're no longer eligible to redeposit for service credit. So it's real important that the member be aware that these requests have to be in prior to the time they retire, and they must be completed requests when they're submitting them. So that's my update on service credit costing. I am over costing elections and account maintenance. So if you have any questions, I'll open it up for questions at this point. Yes.
When I get the form for going back and looking over the years if there's credit work that they could claim, it's not specific as to whether or not, say, it's student help versus temporary classified. So on those forms, should we just be putting down the hours that they would qualify for buying time and eliminating, say, student help, or do you want all of it on there with specific indication of whether or not it was student help versus temporary?
Emily, could you answer that question? She's over our membership area, and they're going to be determining that arrears period. I'm guessing you want all of the information.
Hi, Emily DeFlores again. We do need all of the information. Normally with schools, there's no exclusions in the contract, so any employment that you have control over their employment should be counted toward membership. So it's easier for us to review these cases when we have month by month detailed reportings of where they worked and how much they worked. Yes. Well, so if they worked like concurrently 2 positions in a given month, I would just go ahead and put that within 1 month, how much time they worked. If they were a student of the school, no. That's excluded. That's
That was my
excluded by law.
question.
Okay,
That
yeah,
was my
that's
question.
excluded
If
by
there's
law.
student help and they're currently a student, normally that time does not
Is
qualify
excluded.
them.
Correct.
So do you want me to exclude that time from those forms?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
I'm
Deborah.
just going to add one more thing. When we make our arrears determinations, we will send the employer and the member a letter, a 30-day letter to say, hey, this person qualified for membership on this day. If you don't agree, contact us. So that is 30 days and probably even possibly 60 days before you guys get a billing. So look out for those letters. And if you guys have any concerns, contact us because we need to try to get that worked out before they do the cost calculation. Thank you.
The employer contact that letter would be sent to, is that something we have control over in my CalPERS, a particular contact type that we can designate?
Let me know. Those are manual letters done by staff. It's not sent out through my CalPERS. So we use the contacts that we have available. If we need to be sending it to the HR department or the payroll department, let us know.
Well, what would your starting position be? The county office?
It would normally be the agency that employed them, the district that employed them.
And it would just be personnel department, or you would, I mean, if you have
Let me
five
defer that. Let me
contacts-
defer that to Andrew because he sends out those letters.
Oh, okay.
As it stands right now, we're just sending the letter to the district that employed the person and sending it to attention to human resources, or if there's a specific person that, if we're going off the SPM form, we'll send it to that person that certified that time, because typically they're a payroll person or an HR person. But the majority goes to the district and just attention human resources.
Okay. All right, thanks.
I have a question regarding the $500 administrative fee. I've had 3 of these or 4 arrears notices, and on 3 of them, they've said the $500 administrative fee was not due, but on 1 it was. So what's the difference there?
So it's probably the type of arrears. If it is a mandatory arrears, both the employer and the member pay the cost and there is no administrative fee. But if it's 20283, that piece of law does require $500 administrative fee.
Thank you.
We had that happen to us. We had billing for it. We requested checks, and then I went in right before I sent my invoices off, and it was closed. It wasn't waived, and there was no explanation. Is there a way that we can be sent a letter explaining that, hey, this invoice has been done away with? Because I had a lot of reversing I had to do, and to reissue a check. I didn't want to send $500 more. I mean, I appreciated the free money, but how would we know that it's been waived? And because the letter was very generic, I got two at the same time, and they both stated the same thing, yet one was closed and the other wasn't. And even at the forum, nobody could explain it to me.
So that's the invoicing is through our fiscal services division. So I'd have to reach out to them to find out what's happening, because if we've determined under Government Code Section 20283 that $500 administrative fee should not be waived. So I would need to find out the situation and see what's going on in order to address your question.
Okay, great. Thank you.
In her case, rather than it being waived, could her regular contributions have been applied to that? Because that's what happened with my account. I didn't specify the accounts receivable ID number, and it was used to pay something else.
It could be, but again, those are actions that are probably being done by our fiscal services. And so just to be able to better inform you of what they're doing and when they're doing it, and the communication to you so you guys know what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those questions.